Hi everyone, and welcome to our Citrix Customer Expert Open Discussion. Today's discussion will be with T-Mobile, a United States-based wireless network operator. In this session, attendees will hear how T-Mobile enhances performance and end-user experience of XenApp and XenDesktop with their WEM implementation. I would like to introduce our featured customer speaker, Hal Lange. He's a senior engineer from Systems Design at T-Mobile. My name is Kristen Roy, and I'm with the Citrix Customer Engagement Team. I'll be your facilitator today. I'm also joined by Chris Edwards. He's a Citrix Senior Product Marketing Manager, Desktop and Applications Group, and he'll be our moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping points so that you know how to participate in today's event. Following my introduction, Chris will oversee the moderated discussion for the remainder of the hour. During this Q&A, we'll be incorporating the questions you submit throughout the call. Our primary goal is to foster interaction. We encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity and ask questions. To submit a question, you can type a question into the GoToWebinar control panel, which you should now be seeing in the upper right corner of your computer screen. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Chris.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. And of course, I want to thank Hal, our featured speaker, and everyone joining in on the GoToWebinar today. So the format will be pretty simple. I'll kick it off with an introduction, and we'll talk about Hal's overall Citrix deployment, as well as how they're optimizing and accelerating the user experience with Userbased environment management. And I'll definitely leave time for Hal to answer some of your questions. So Hal, thanks for joining us. And the first thing I want to do is just get a little bit of, your background with Citrix products as well as your background at T-Mobile.
All right. Well, I'll start with the easy one, and that's I've been at T-Mobile for about a year. I was a independent consultant for 10 years before that, so I'm working on Citrix stuff. As far as my Citrix experience, it goes back to the WinFrame days. I've been working with Citrix for well over 20 years. Went through the WinFrames, MetaFrames, you name it, presentation servers. I've pretty much hit them all, as well as all the third parties that have come in and left over the years, specializing mainly in user experience and profiles. So I like to call it the user's CRAP is the acronym, Computer Residue of Applications and Personalization, CRAP. So that's what I specialize in.
Awesome. And can you give some background on your experience with WEM?
With WEM, since Citrix has taken it over from Northscale, I was the lead engineer for the Western Hemisphere for Northscale. As an independent consultant, we did the reselling for it. So when Citrix took over WEM, it just naturally followed that I continued with the product and has continued to stay on top of it, as well as implement it probably close to 100,000 seats as an independent consultant before becoming a T-Mobile employee.
Thank you. So before we talk about your WEM implementation, let's talk about just the background of your overall XenApp and XenDesktop environment. So what's the size and scope of your Citrix deployment at T-Mobile?
We have multiple. So I have a XenDesktop actual VDI type solution that handles about anywhere from 12 to 25,000 retail sites. And then I have a XenApp environment, which again is getting migrated into the XenDesktop infrastructure. It's currently 6.5 going to 7.16. It is handling anywhere from another 12 to 18,000 call center users. And then we have many other spattering of XenDesktop and XenApp implementations for the one-off scenarios where we have certain applications work better that way. So we have 100 users here, 1,000 users there, 50 users here. All depends on those situations.
Got it. Thank you. So what type of hardware platform are you using for your XenApp and XenDesktop deployment?
Our biggest component or biggest usage is Nutanix. We like the Nutanix because, one, it's all self-inclusive. It has the storage, networking, and all that kind of built into it, so we don't have to worry about other groups dealing with our performance for storage or anything like that. So it makes it much simpler for us to manage the whole platform rather than having to have other organizations manage certain pieces of it and then try and work with us to get everything configured correctly.
And how many data center locations are you publishing resources from?
We are a hot scenario where we have 2 data centers. I do believe one is in the Washington area and one is in the Texas area. I'm not sure exactly where because I don't like stepping into them. They're cold and warm, so I don't go into them. But we have 2 hot data centers where we try and run 50-50 of our users out of each one using GSLB to determine which one they're going to.
Gotcha. And from these 2 data centers, you're publishing resources to users all over the world?
Yes. Call center users are worldwide, Philippines, so Asia, South America. I do believe we have some in Europe. And the XenDesktop infrastructure is pretty much North America, but that does include things like Puerto Rico and some of the other island states out there.
Gotcha. And what are the most important types of business applications that you're delivering to your users?
Again, depends on which environment we have. We have the retail side. It's the most important one is our POS system because they are the retail side. And then in the call center, it's the customer database lookup utility that they have. So they can help with the users when they call into our care centers.
Okay, perfect. And what type of devices are they using? Any BYOD, any thin clients?
The correct answer is yes. We have many we have many of the retail sites are on thin clients. We also have a lot of third parties that are coming in and bringing their own devices. We have laptops. We have Macs. We have little devices, whether they're Android or iPads or if you name the device, we probably have it coming into our environment.
Awesome. And then are you leveraging GPUs for any of your applications?
We have a couple applications that are very heavily using the GPUs. Those are some of our small one-offs. Going forward, we are starting to put GPUs, though, into everything just for better performance and better user experience.
Perfect. Awesome. So around like the benefits that you get from your overall Citrix deployment, can you comment just on like the business agility and, you know, the increase in productivity and collaboration that you get from your Citrix deployment?
Well, just like most organizations, we're not told when new stores are being opened. So we have to keep a close eye on our environment because next thing you know, we're starting to run out of capacity because they've been opening so many stores without telling us that. We've been able to keep up with the environment just because we do keep an eye on it, as well as call centers. We bring on new call centers, it seems like almost on a bi-weekly basis, and we just have to keep on top of it with the numbers and then go back and beg for hardware just like everyone else.
Yep. All right. Yeah, if there's any questions so far from the audience, feel free to put them in the chat window. All right, so let's get into talking about your workspace environment management deployment. So you were hired by T-Mobile. They brought you in, and you kind of came in and realized that they could really benefit from WEM, and you led the project?
Yes. I wasn't sure if there was anything else going after that. Yeah, so when I came into T-Mobile, they put me on the 6.5 environment because, you know, being the new guy, give them the bad stuff. So the first thing I did was look at the environment and saw that our utilization was through the roof. We had a lot of bad practices going on, one of them being just no user experience monitoring. We have no roaming profile, so it should have been really simple. One of the things I did, the first things I did was I added in the WEM performance optimizations and only that, not dealing with it for policies at that time. And we got a increase across all of our servers, which are close to 200 Nutanix nodes, we have an immediate, within the first 15 days, a almost 10% increase in capacity. Our utilization went down that much. As well as putting in the performance optimizations just in those first 15 days, our average login went down 56%. We went from 123 seconds down to a 69-second login, and that's just by adding the performance optimization and without adding any other features or optimizations, which I did do, of course, as things have progressed.
Awesome. Were you able to quantify the cost savings on that increase in server scalability?
When you're talking, $70,000 to $90,000 a box, and you have almost 200 of them, 10% capacity gives us what, 20 more boxes essentially. So there's that actual hardware cost avoidance that we had with expanding out call centers and expanding out the retail systems. But then there's the soft costs of the average login per user. If you're saving half the time or almost a minute per user, and they're logging in and out every day constantly. We have a 1 minute disconnect time where it kicks them off. So we're looking at an average of 7 or 8 logins per user a day. So that's 7 or 8 minutes per user going across 15,000 users. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of people to do the math there to figure out that's an ungodly amount of soft costs that we're saving as well.
It's pretty incredible. Let's pause for a minute on your WEM implementation just because we have a question that goes back to your overall data center setup. So the question is all of your data in one of the data centers, or is the data spread between the two locations? If it is one center, how do you keep performance consistent?
That is a very fun question. Like I said, we don't have user profile, so I don't have to worry about it from my side of the house. As far as the applications are concerned, depending on how mission critical the app is, it is also hot in the two data centers, and then the application owners are responsible for keeping their data in sync across the data centers. If they are not a mission critical app, they tend to run out of our primary data center with a cold scenario in our other one. And at that point, we're just dealing with basically a WAN connectivity over to the app to deal with the data.
Gotcha. And if the data is in both places, then you're using some data replication?
It's up to the app owner. Some of the app teams use a data replication at the software layer. Some use it at the storage layer. Some use it at the machine layer. It's outside of my realm. So since I don't have to worry about data, it's not my concern.
Gotcha. Understood. So we have another question in the chat. How many WEM brokers do you have, and how many users both?
We're in a pod infrastructure. So what that means is we have basically things isolated to a rack, and we try and make it so we never have more than 2,500 users per rack. So the way we're doing it is we have one WEM server per rack with a failover ability to a different rack. But we keep all the traffic local to that rack, giving it approximately 2,500 users per WEM servers.
Gotcha. So, I mean, this is a pretty large deployment of workspace environment management, and you've done some pretty large deployments in your consulting experience. So, can you share some of your best practices for deploying WEM at this scale?
A lot of it has to do with plan. Make sure you have planned thoroughly regarding how you're going to do the infrastructure. So if you're going to do a pod scenario like we are, then doing one WEM server per pod tends to be the way to go, because the load balancing just gets in the way at that point, and you get a lot of cross chatter. If you're doing a one big scenario where you don't have a pod infrastructure, then you have to start dealing with load balancing, and I'd start dealing with GSLB. What I did in the past in my consulting days was I ended up doing a lot of GSLB with namespaces, So that way I could make sure I hit the right data center, and then inside that data center I had multiple servers load balanced as well. So it all depends on how you've planned your environment. The thing I can stress the most is plan. Definitely focus on how you're going to do it. If you're going to do a pod infrastructure, putting one per pod, you can do load balance if you want different names between different pods. And what we found is that gets to be kind of convoluted and cumbersome. So we have one server mainly per pod, where it's when the systems boot up, they dynamically change to that local server of that pod. And then if that server was to go down, we're running out of cache. So we don't have to worry about it.
All right, we have a few more questions in the chat. You mentioned that you don't have user profiles. What have you been using instead? Mandatory profiles?
To start with, it was mandatory profiles. Now we're actually doing a temp spoof profile. So we let them log in. We have a generic one set up, but it's not mandatory. When it logs off, though, it automatically deletes it because it is a temp profile.
All right, and we have another question. What are the resource requirements for those brokers to handle 2,500 users? Do they differ from the recommended 4 cores and 8 gigs of RAM?
Depending on what you're doing with it would also depend on how much resources you need. The one environment, when I put in just the performance optimization and nothing else, I was able to get 10,000 users on one box with that same stat, with the 4 core and 8 CPUs. Or I'm sorry, 4 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. Now that we're going more into the policy realm as well as performance optimization at the 2,500, I'm actually needing the full 4, and depending on how hard that pod is getting hit, I've actually had to bump them up to 12 gigs of RAM to be able to handle it appropriately.
All right. Yeah, and for the audience, if you have any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat. All right, so going back to when you were talking about, you did the resource optimization and you got the time savings on the logins. Have you since then utilized WEM for the user-based policies?
We have implemented that in our retail side. It's actually rolling into production now. So that'll be going to the XenDesktop Win 7/Win 10 boxes. And I'm in the process of building it for our XenApp environment. So that way I'll be using the policies on that as well and getting rid of my GPOs.
Gotcha. So you think you could save more time on the logins?
As far the retail has already shown that we are cutting it down another 40%.
Wow. So you got something like 53% from the resource optimization and then another 40% from the policy engine. Yep.
So the numbers that I mentioned before were the XenApp side. So if I get the same numbers, I'll probably be down to about a 20-second login time. In the retail side, we already had a 12-second login just because of how little GPOs we had in place and it being the temp spoof profile. So it's a very quick login. We got it down to, it looks like about 7 seconds now.
Gotcha. Okay, a couple more questions in the chat. For the WEM system optimization, how do you determine what was the best threshold to use?
I'm not sure I'm following that question. If I had to get,
I think they're asking about just the optimization policies. Like, how did you know what to set, like your RAM and CPU?
That's where I thought they were going with that. So CPU, the way I've always looked at it, and the best practice that I helped develop with the Northscale side, was however many CPUs you have in the box, divide that number out of 100, so that way you can get the number of what one CPU is going to be, and then I always subtracted 1. So if I had a 4 CPU box, divide it divide 100 by 4, you get 25%, and then I subtract 1 to make it 24% would be the highest threshold that I have. The main reason is I did not want a single-threaded process to destroy my system, to destroy one processor. That single-threaded would definitely be taken care of at that point. What I found is that number still works really well. It's not a hard, fast rule, of course, but it has worked really well for me in the past, and it's worked really well for me here. The idea is that it does not do it aggressively, as in if you're not using if you're just using the standard optimization side for the CPU, when you turn it on, it's going to let the system manage the CPU, but it's going to let that application take 100% of the CPU if it's asking for it. If it's a multi-threaded process that is going to take 100%, it will still take 100%. It doesn't cap it at the 24. It just allows other users to access some of that processor when they need it, so that way it dials back the original one, the one that's taking up all the processor, so it gives a better user experience. Because it's not a hard cap, I have not found any downsides to that yet. I have used clamping in the past once, and that's when I had an in-house program that was programmed very badly, and they had a CPU eating issue, which I had to clamp it down so it didn't destroy the box just to start with. As far as RAM, what I can say is make sure you have enough page file, because if you turn on the RAM optimization, it does page a lot more. So if you, it will use a lot more hardware RAM, like real RAM instead of the page file, so it does act like it's going faster, but your page file definitely does fill. And if you have very slow moving disk, it will affect the performance. And as far as the I/O optimizations, there's a lot of best practices out there on things that you want to make sure get added into that, which are things like your antivirus, any kind of IT utilities that you have on there, security things, disk watching, monitoring tools. Make sure all those get added in there as well, so that way it does not take resources away from the users. And the whole idea of the performance optimization is to make sure that your users have the best experience, not necessarily your tools.
All right, we have some more questions in the chat. So someone's asking if you have one WEM setup, basically how do you deal with the optimization when your VDAs have a mix of number of CPUs? I think that's what they're asking.
What I did in the past as a consultant is I went with the one that had the most amount of CPUs, so the lowest percentage, and I set that if I needed to keep it at one site. So go back to the NorScale days when I was doing it for desktops as well. We had some that had the 4, we had some that had 6, we had some that were only 2. I would set the CPU percentage at the 6 one, which is what, 18% or something like that. So I would set it at that level because, again, it's not a hard cap, but I wanted to make sure that my single-threaded process did not destroy the CPU.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, and they answered that. That answered their question.
Okay.
Let's see. There's another question. Did you move all the Active Directory policies to WEM? And we covered that a few minutes ago. That you're in the process of moving.
I did not move. I'm not moving all Active Directory policies. I'm moving anything that is user-based, anything that is computer-based. I'm definitely leaving in GPO, just because it's affecting the computer. It's not affecting the user experience, so I don't really care. And WEM can't do computer policies, so it kind of makes it a no-brainer. And then there are a few exceptions to every rule. That there are some policies that I am leaving in user policies for GPO, and those tend to be company mandated things that I have no control over. So instead of me trying to manage it in a WEM policy and then wait for them to do an update and yell at me, I just leave that in the user GPO as well.
Gotcha.
I also did find that trusted sites is actually much easier to deal with in GPO than it is in WEM. You can actually, I know most people put a trusted site as a user-based policy. I've actually switched over to putting it as a computer-based policy and just having the computer know what goes into the trusted sites versus having it be user-based. Again, works for my
Okay.
environment, not necessarily for everyone.
We have another question. What version of WEM are you using?
That's the fun one. I've got 4.3, 4.5, and 4.6. 4.3 is the original performance optimization one that I'm doing, or that I put in 9-10 months ago. 4.5 is what's currently being rolled out in production, and 4.6 is in our stage environment for testing to make sure that it is good.
All right, yeah, 4.6 is the latest. So another question, with regard to limiting 2,500 users per rack to a single broker, how are you managing this? Is it policy based on XenApp server name?
Actually, it's OU based. So I do the, as far as the registry key to point to the broker, I actually have a startup script on all my boxes because I'm using PVS. I guess I did forget to mention that. I'm using PVS for all of my environments, so I'm using one image instead of making one image for every pod. So I have certain services set to manual or other services that I change configuration and then restart at boot. In the XenDesktop side, we actually have the service set to manual, and when it boots up, it reads the Bootup Script, sets the brokers to the correct site for us, or the correct zone, and then starts the service. Since the WEM service does not allow for it to be set to manual because of some net logon dependencies and everything else, what we do there is we bring it up when the system boots, we change the registry key and then restart the service and then resync the cache. So that way we have all that set up. And that's all before a user has the ability to log in, because all of that, the WEM stuff and anything else we have for boot happens before we start the desktop broker service or Citrix desktop service. So that way it's not ready for logins until everything else has completed.
So when you said it's based on OU, does that mean that in that rack, all the XenApp servers are in the same OU?
All of my racks are actually in the same OU. So what I mean by based on OU is the WEM Active Directory object for setting to my site. All of my WEM servers use the same database. They all use the same OU to determine which site to go to inside my WEM environment. The Bootup script is actually using PVS personalities to determine which rack they're in.
Okay, another question from the chat. Do you use Citrix app layering with WEM?
No.
All right.
I have a lot of opinions on app layering, but yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Gotcha.
I've been an app virtualization guy and an app layering guy for years. So,
what are your recommendations in a multi-domain scenario, cross-domain search in terms of performance?
Punt.
Punt.
I know that there's a lot of issues that the development team has been working on really diligently on working on the performance for multiple domain. I know it is not where it should be. Luckily, I don't have to deal with that. So the only times I've been seeing that or playing with it is in my lab environment for all my community projects. So the best I can say at this point is punt. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No worries. So going back to talking about that cost savings, I mean, do you guys have any plans on what other IT initiatives to fund with that cost savings?
It's actually funding some, what are they called now? Well, it's funded some SDXs, and we're looking at funding. It used to be called branch repeater. I don't remember what it's called now. Citrix SD-WAN, I think is what it is called now.
Yeah.
So we're looking at using some of that for some of our overseas locations, as well as some of our low bandwidth areas.
All right, another question from the chat. Do you use the CPU clamping on any processes? And if so, can you give examples?
The only time I've ever used the CPU clamping, like I said, was when that bad programmer wrote a app that just decided to chew up the CPU. Otherwise, I have not used it in a production environment besides that one time. I have not found a viable reason to use the CPU clamping or the CPU affinity. I've been looking throughout the community for somebody to give me a viable production reason for it, and we've only been able to come up with the one, which was the bad programmer. I'm sure there's one out there. I have not been able to find one.
Awesome. What advice could you give someone who's looking into WEM and evaluating WEM for the first time?
Take your time. Start with the performance optimization. It is the easiest part. Once you get into that and you start seeing what it can do, there are so many things that you can do with the policy engine or the policy side of the house, as well as there's a lot of just easy to use checkboxes to turn on things like certain generic registry entries that everyone always uses, like hiding the run, hiding the search, hiding the find. Works. It puts UPM on steroids. It actually puts any profile solution on steroids, but UPM seems to work really, really well with it. And the other thing I can suggest is check out a lot of the blogs out there and a lot of the I know I've written a few. A friend of mine, James Kinden's written a few. There's a lot of caveats to some of those easy checkboxes. The one that always comes to first and foremost is the hide run. I've been asking the developers to change what that actually changes in the registry, because it turns on a Microsoft bug, which always gets blamed back to Citrix and WEM, but it is not them. So just make sure you're careful and you go slow when it comes to the policies. But the performance ones you could turn on instantly and have instant performance increases. It's very simple. So I would always say start there.
Gotcha. Here's another question about some other similar vendors and some of our Citrix Ready partners. Is it easy to migrate UEM configurations like AppSense and Res used by customers to the WEM platform? Any comment?
I got lots of comments. I was an AppSense bigot before Norscale came on the board. So I've done my fair share of migrations from Res and from AppSense and everything. My suggestion is it all depends on how you're using those products. If you're using AppSense for the virtual profile and it's working for you, my suggestion is keep using it for the virtual profile. Use WEM for the performance optimization aspects. I mean, they could all work with WEM without any issues, and that's always the first step when I did any migration, is just get WEM involved in the solution, at least with the performance optimization, and then slowly start taking over some of the other aspects if needed. The virtual profile solutions that are out there, it makes it a little bit harder to migrate, because you're going to keep those or you're pretty much going to change out the profiles anyways to something else, which in that case you might as well just change it all in one big bang. But as far as just using the policy engine, you can mix and match. You can slowly move them over one setting at a time if you want to. You can do a big bang. You can do a big group. All I can say is plan. Always plan. And then test. However long you took to plan, take twice as long to test.
All right, that sounds good. Yeah, so some more questions around spike protection. I'm not sure if you specifically covered this, but for CPU spike protection, do you have a go-to for limit sample time and idle priority time? And then the same question for memory management.
Yes and yes. I have some go-to times. Let me pull those up so that way I don't misspeak. Oh, don't click that button. By default, the WEM one is 15 minutes. Again, most users, why do I want to wait 15 minutes for that? So for the memory side, I almost always take that down to 5 minutes, just so that way they get a bigger bang for their buck. Also for PVS, I never actually use the cache on the persistent disk. I never use the WEM cache on the persistent disk. I always keep it in the image for the simple fact of one day I have user A on box A. The next day I have user A on box B, and now user B is on box A. Now user B is going to be limited to what the user A had done on the box before him. So it determines so quickly the resource utilization and how it should work that I don't want to have another user affecting. If I have a engineer working with a CAD program on one day and the next day I have an accounting person logging into the same box, they're going to have completely different needs as far as the CPU and the RAM. So I don't want to limit it by having it set already by the local cache. So that I definitely do. And definitely for the memory, it's 5 minutes just to get it going quicker and more often, so that way they could keep freeing up resources. I do not see any kind of issues with the users when it comes to putting them in so quickly. Oops, it might help if I put in the right server name. Yep, there we go. So the fact that it's 5 minutes, I have not seen by paging it out all the time that it causes more detriment to the user than it causes benefit. The benefit always seems to outweigh, but again, I am hitting that page file a lot, so be aware of that. As far as the CPU management, again, I put it down for the limit percentage. Like I said, with the math, figure out what your CPUs are, and I go one less. Sample time, I always do 30 seconds, and idle priority, I always do 180. So if it's an offending app for 30 seconds, let's attack it and make it better, and then don't let it off the hook until it's been a nice guy for 180 seconds.
All right. Have you tried using Nutanix AFS to store user profiles, folder redirections, or PVSB disks?
No, no, and no.
All right. So I guess moving forward, do you have any plans for any other Citrix implementations, and just how does Citrix fit into your plans moving forward?
I got lots of plans. Always have plans. The question is, will management buy in on it or not? That's always the question.
Yep.
So,
any plans for cloud?
not to use Citrix Cloud. We don't have any plans for that. I mean, we do have plans to burst our services into the cloud. So when we get to those high retail days or those high usage days, instead of having all the resources available local, we are planning on setting up the ability to burst our worker resources up into the cloud. But we have no plans at this point for Citrix Cloud. I know it's just a matter of time.
Yep, they're taking your on-prem XenApp and XenDesktop and extending some workloads up into a public cloud.
Correct.
All right. Are there any other, Citrix solutions that you're looking at for any cost savings benefit?
We're starting to toy with the idea of Zen Server as well, just because we can get out of our tax that we have, and it works with the GPU so well. But Besides that, there's the SDXs that I already mentioned that we're planning on implementing, which will be another cost savings. Yeah,
Awesome.
we're slowly adding a whole bunch of Kool-Aid into the environment. So
Yeah, would you be able to quantify the savings on the VTAX?
200, approximately 200 nodes of Nutanix all being taxed with that VTax, whichever name your vendor, they all have their own tax to go with it. And then if I was to switch to Zen server, which is covered under my Citrix licensing, all of that money goes away or gets reappropriated, hopefully, for other things that I want.
Yes, that sounds like it's in the millions.
Yes.
All right, awesome. Yeah, we have one last question. Do you use intelligent I/O optimization?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. And then I even enable the process list, which guaranteed should be in there is Trusted Installer, Microsoft Security Essentials, and then whatever antivirus you have are the top 3 things that get put into that enable process IO priority list, all set to low. You then can start adding in, like I said, all your other IT tools. If you have a Malwarebytes or you have a DLP agent or whatever you have in there, you can also add in, just so that way it doesn't affect the users. That's the whole goal of it, is give the users the best experience possible in IT tools, IT people, and not so much.
All right. Well, I think we just about covered everything. So this is the last call for questions in the chat. Hal, I greatly appreciate your time. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, Chris. And if we have no remaining questions, it appears that we're approaching the end of the session. Thanks again, Chris, and thank you, Hal. Also, thank you to the audience for all of your insightful questions. We really appreciate all the questions that you guys have been asking. If you guys have any remaining questions, please don't hesitate to contact me by sending me an email at kristen.roy@citrix.com. We hope that all of you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Yep, thank you.
All right, bye all.
Thank you. Thanks, Hal.
Yep.